Hi everyone, I'm Mark Murray and welcome to this very special edition of Hamilton CityVision. Late in 2010, I was asked if we could do a series of shows bringing on former city managers so we could talk about their time in the office. I was lucky in March of 2011 to bring on Jack Kirsch and Mike Samovisky, and then in May of 2011 we brought on Steve Sorrell and Mark Brandenberger. Well, in the studio today, I have the man who has the notoriety of having the longest tenure in modern times as city manager from 1989 to 1999. And he happens to be in town for the Old Hamilton Taft 50th High School reunion. And ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Hal Shepard. Hal, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. Well, let's start with how you began your employment, or when did you begin your employment with the city, and describe your rise to city manager.
I was working at Miami University for the Dean of Students and interviewing Ed Smith, who was city manager for about 6 months, for a labor paper I was working on. And he asked me to stay the second day, and I spent 2 days in his office. And at the end of the second day, unbeknownst to me, his assistant had already quit, and he was getting ready to advertise the assistant's position and offered me the job.
So it was a class project, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So, city manager, describe your rise to that.
Well, I worked for Ed Smith 4 years. He left the city, and Jack Kirsch, who was public works director, became city manager. I worked for Jack 8 years. He retired in '83, and then they hired Bill Tallman from Pennsylvania, and he worked a year and a half, and then he left. And Jack Becker, who was finance director, was named city manager, and I worked for Jack 4 years. And that brought us up to April of '89, and City Council decided they want to stay inside and offered me the position, and I started then April 1st, '89.
Okay, well, describe your management style.
Well, I always believed a manager's no better than the staff he has working with him and for him, and providing City Council with the information they need to make decent decisions. And so I had a participative type of view. I encouraged people to ask questions and give me opposite views that I might have had. We had good open discussions, and I was pleased that when I was city manager that even though sometimes council disagreed with me, I always felt I had my viewpoint on the table they could consider or reject. Mm-hmm. And I think I won most of the arguments, but there were a few I didn't. But I never felt I didn't have my information, my recommendation out there for them.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw some issues out, Hal, and just tell me what comes to mind. And these are going to jump around a little bit, probably some as your time before city manager and some during your time as city manager. The bicentennial projects.
Well, that was a really important period, 1991, and I was city manager at the time. Tom Rentschler was chairman of the Bicentennial Commission. And the Community Foundation, which is a really important part of our community, was very active. In fact, that's when the Community Foundation really stepped up to the plate to do a number of projects. Jack Becker and I worked on the dam project and the bikeway. It finished under my tenure. And then the Community Foundation did the parking lot at the dam. They did the Markham Loop on the west side of the river. And they did the boat ramp for the river. So we were starting the enhancement program for the Great Miami. And there were a lot of really educational programs, the history of Hamilton. Hamilton's an old city. Out west, the city I worked for later was founded in the 1880s. This city is 1791, so it was early in Northwest Territory history.
All right, well, let's talk about TV Hamilton.
Well, TV Hamilton started, I was concerned about communicating more with the public, having local programming, and I teamed up with the school district at the time. And also we had TCI was the cable provider, and we had that money going into the general fund. And council agreed with me to take the money from the TV franchise, cable franchise, and put that into a TV Hamilton fund. And I did a contract with the school district. They provided support with the Hamilton High School location, built a studio, and then after we had that work done, we started interviewing directors, and Jack Armstrong was the first director we hired.
Okay. Here we sit today in a new studio, just a couple of years old.
That's great looking
It's
studio.
grown, yeah, absolutely. All right. The Government Services Center, One Renaissance Center, the government complex.
Well, for people that lived here at that time, there were a lot of retail stores in that block from, at that time, was State Street all the way to Martin Luther King Boulevard. They were closed. None of them were operating. The benefit was one owner had acquired those particular parcels.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all under one ownership, and that was Harry Wilkes. And I negotiated with him to purchase the block and tear the buildings down at city cost. Didn't have a plan at the time other than council was very upset, and so was the public, about how that block looked. I mean, it was really decayed. So we started that project, acquired the property, and demolished the buildings. And the county was talking about needing more room than the services center next to Elder Bierman. So we began a discussion with the county, and then we had a community committee put together to develop the project, and it grew. The county needs grew tremendously, and we saw the vision for that was going to be a new major county building at that site. The developers and the architects that were hired decided to do a spec building next to it. And so that was going to be under construction, and some members of the city council felt the need to acquire the spec building, and that was going to be the new city building. There was differences of opinion on city council on that. I had a different opinion. I was certainly interested. This old city building needed a lot of work, probably $2 million work at the time.
Yeah, easily.
Electrical, plumbing, heating systems were pretty much outdated. It was a 1935 building that wasn't functioning well at all, because people didn't realize, unless they walked the building, how many hallways were in this building. We did add the utility wing a number of years after the 1935 project. It still was inadequate. And so the majority of council decided to move ahead with acquiring the spec building, and that's what was done. I never got to work in it. My part in the project was assembling the property and working on the design with this committee, and that was about a year and a half worth of work. But when I retired in April '99, it wasn't finished.
In 1999 is when I was given the project to begin moving everybody from the old city building to the new city building.
Okay.
And I was one of the first occupants, along with other members of my department. May of 2000 is when so we've been in there over 12 years already.
Wow.
Just kind of hard to believe. All right, let's move on. Failed annexation, Enterprise Park is a result.
Well, that's a really big item, and probably my biggest disappointment as city manager, that we didn't accomplish the goals there. Our job was certainly economic development, and we did a lot of good things during the decade of the 90s to create, and one I'm most proud about is Valio. There was 300 jobs involved with bringing Valio from Indiana here. I won't have all the dates, so I think Jack Becker and I worked on connector manufacturing. I did Hamilton Fixture and the Keesland Business Park, did that. But we didn't have enough room. Bottom line was we were running out of room in the Southwestern Ohio Industrial Park. So I told City Council, and it became a very controversial, and it shouldn't have been. Job development is the most important thing in a community. And we didn't have any land. So I went to City Council, and they agreed with me to take an option on the Rentschler Farm, which was 330 acres out on Route 4. And what we wanted to do was a high-tech blue ash type development. So it wasn't factory jobs. I said, and this was probably in '94, we can't rely on Champion and Beckett's and these old buildings. If they have a fire, they won't rebuild them. If they're destroyed, the Texas paper plants were making a lot more paper per day than this plant could. And I was worried that there could be a time when, and it certainly happened as far as International Paper buying out Champion, and Champion disappeared. Didn't know that in 1995, so I just knew we needed more expansion of job development. And I looked at it as a county-wide need. It would help Fairfield Township, Fairfield City, Butler County. You wouldn't have to drive so far to get a job, and a high-tech job
Right.
at that time. It opened a firestorm. Not only did we have an option on the Rentschler farm, we had 3 or 4 other farms, but it totaled 1,037 acres. And that was a good-sized chunk of Fairfield Township. And I think part of it was they didn't want to have Fairfield students go to Hamilton schools. That could have been one issue. It wasn't going to be any students because I didn't want any houses built there. It was going to be industrial.
Business development.
Yeah, and clean industry. Mike Fox, who was our state representative, passed some special legislation to create Indian Springs. Well, city of Indian Springs, I can't annex from another city. And Don Dixon was a Fairfield trustee, and between the two of them, they basically fought this annexation through the public hearing process, tooth and nail. But what was worse is at the end of the battle, Mr. Dixon decided he threatened a federal lawsuit against the highway, which was not built, critical to Hamilton, also for economic
The highway, you're
development.
talking about 129.
Yeah, Butler Regional Highway.
Okay.
And City Council then, at that point, said, well, it's either the highway or the annexation. We'll go with the highway. So we had to drop the annexation. And those 10,000 jobs that I thought could be developed in those 4 areas never happened. And what we had is a golf course, replaced that, along with houses. And the last thing Butler County needed was more houses. But unfortunately, houses don't pay the infrastructure to operate communities like cities and townships and counties. There's some good industrial development in Westchester. There could have been more, and people wouldn't have to drive so far to go to a job. We lost all that, and that was unfortunate. But I think as I drive through Westchester and Liberty Township, fields and fields, what used to be farms, houses. The street infrastructure isn't there. The schools have had lots of problems keeping up with more buildings, and the taxation to supply those operations in schools. Jobs are a critical part of an environment where people live. And I think it was sad that we lost that ability to do that. We had the utility infrastructure in place to do it. We didn't have the land. After that was lost, then the one parcel that was left inside the city was the Lewis Farm. And I told City Council, then let's buy the Lewis Farm. And we negotiated with those owners, bought that. And that's the last really decent place where you could put some type of industrial, clean environment type jobs. And it wasn't big enough, but I wanted to sell it based upon how many jobs per acre a person would come in with. So if you had 100 jobs, you'd have a cheaper price. We were going to control that environment because we were going to own it. If you had a warehouse with 5 jobs and you wanted 30 acres, I wouldn't sell it to you because it would not work. Cities use income tax, and the problem Hamilton has today is the loss of Champion and Beckett's and the loss of that income tax. After I left, Ohio Casualty moved out of downtown, which impacted the whole downtown, and that was between 2,000 and 3,000 jobs lost. You can't lose those kinds of jobs and expect the service level to be the same, 10 years later. And Hamilton has some real challenges because of the job loss of our major industry that we had. And in the 90s we had it, and we did some good things with that, but we've got a tough row ahead.
Okay, let's move on to another one. You've got down fire department station relocations, and you mentioned 3.
Well, the fire department I was intimately involved with from 72 on, but also my father was a career firefighter here, and he was on the department from 42 to, he retired in 71, January 71. I came in January 72, so we never served together. And they were operating Company 5 on North 9th Street, South 9th, and very obsolete fire station. And we acquired some property on North Erie and relocated Company 5 to a much better location, much larger station, some extra bays for extra equipment, because we're going to start specializing in some of the things, hazmat, that we didn't have available in the department. That was one. And then on the west side, for years, Company 1 was at Main and Millville by itself, covering the whole west side, had to have backup from the 5s at one time on 9th Street and Company 2 at the City Building. Well, I bought some property on Brookwood, and we relocated Company 1's engine company to Brookwood, with the thought if we could acquire the property at Front and Pershing for the new headquarters station, we can use Columbia Bridge to back up Company 1 all over the west side much faster, especially Southern Hills and Columbia Heights and those areas out New London Road, as well as the southern part of the city. So we were able to do a headquarters company and relocate that, and that was started just before I left and came back to dedicate it later.
The Hal Shepherd Fire Department headquarters.
Well, City Council was, very kind to me to do that. I said at the dedication that it's really for all the firefighters that served in the past, and I was glad that they recognized the 3 that were killed at the courthouse fire, and Chief Myers that lost his life up in Oxford, and others. I really enjoyed knowing the firefighters in Hamilton during my career, as well as I hung out at fire stations when I was in grade school through high school. So I knew most of the firefighters.
Pretty well, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the dedication they showed, and my interest besides economic development, was public safety, and I spent a lot of time in the police department in 72. I was
We actually graduated from a police academy, didn't you?
I think I was the only city manager that did. I went through the Ohio Peace Officer Academy before I was hired here. That was a result of Kent State and the problems that the universities had. We switched over from security at Miami to regular university police. And so that was helpful when I took the job as assistant city manager. And the 4 managers I worked for weren't that excited about police and fire operations, and I was. So I jumped in there and spent a lot of time on patrol in the police department and rode with deputy chiefs of the fire department, and really that was the most enjoyable part of my job.
Why didn't you become a firefighter?
Actually, I was given notice of a civil service test when I was in college, and I came into the office and they said I was too short, and 1 inch too short.
1 inch too short.
And I wasn't qualified to take the exam, so I didn't. And so that's how I never got on the fire department. And I don't know what I would have done after I took the test, but I was curious enough to take the test.
Okay.
And then ended up coming back, and as I told several chiefs, I said it was kind of more fun having a chief report to you than work your way up. So it worked out okay. But in saying about police and fire officers in both departments, it's been an excellent relationship, and I've enjoyed it. But all the employees, again, the city manager can't possibly do the work that's required without support from Public Works, Public Utilities, Public Health, Parks and Recreation. We had 13 departments, and they were filled with really good people that worked hard for the citizens.
Good foundation. All right. And I only heard about this as I started with the city. I started with the city in November of '98. Refuse collection. There were big changes in refuse collection around here.
The city operated refuse forever, and
A private, I mean, essentially a municipal refuse
municipal
collection.
refuse collection. There's not many of them left, and we reached a point, and it was a financial issue, and but no one thought you could get rid of refuse, because the AFSCME union, that was their kind of bread and butter issue. And what I try to do is come up with a solution that would be a triple win: a win for the union, a win for the citizens, and a win for the budget, being the city. And what we did, I met with Henry Bowling, who was president of the union at that time. And I said, we got to talk about refuse sometime. And he says, nope. And I said, yeah, I think I came up with an idea I think you'll like. So we met with his committee over at his house for about 5 hours one evening. And I had replaced a number of retirees with temporaries. So I had about 10 of the 30 employees as temporaries, which were not in the union and would not stay. And what I told the union was, I'm going to transfer 10 of you to the Parks Department, and we're really going to do some infrastructure improvements, painting, roofing, things that these people had talent for that we could use. I saved vacancies in gas and water distribution for the rest, and the 10 that were temporaries were out the door, and guaranteed them the same salaries. They thought about it, and they said, well, we just need something more. And so I looked over the group, and I knew that they were 20 years or more into the system, and I said, I'll go to council and guarantee your job till retirement as long as there's not a disciplinary problem or something.
A guaranteed job?
Guaranteed job.
Wow, okay.
So I met with the entire union, which represented streets and sewers, motor transport, the refuse division, and the refuse division was okay with the idea. And there was about 55 in the union, I think. I met down at the city garage, and I laid it out to them, and one of the guys in motor transport says, Hal, that's a great idea for those guys, but what about us? Next year you got a budget problem, and we're going to get axed. I looked around the room, and most of them were over 45, and I figured, if things got bad, we can attrition jobs, we can make this work. And so I said, I will guarantee your jobs till retirement as long as it's not a disciplinary problem for the entire union. But we'd have to amend the contract, put your name and job title down, and your transfer job title. We did that, and then it was passed by the union, passed by city council. And we didn't have to. In fact, I remember once later we hired a new street person, streets and sewers, and he read the contract and he said, I want to get my name on this contract. And Henry told him, no, you had to be there then to get the
Sure.
your name on the contract. So it was a win. We got a lot of work done in the Parks Department. The employees really got better jobs than what they had in refuse. And there was a savings because the savings through the contract at the low bid, or the highest bid at that time, was Rumpke. They got the contract. And what I didn't mention, we had about 10 refuse trucks we had to replace, which would probably been about $2 million. So that was a savings. I had to buy no trucks.
Okay.
And the savings through that contract paid for the salaries of these people, like in parks.
Wow. All right. Now I've got Bikeway Dam. Now we talked about the low-level dam in the Bikeway earlier. Or is there, just want to make sure there's nothing I've missed here.
No, I think that was, the river, the low water level in the river was always a contentious problem in the community. Jack Becker worked on that, and then I followed up with it, finished it, and then the Bikeway was also both of us working on.
Okay.
And I think was a real asset to the community.
Now I've got Twin Run Clubhouse. What was your role in that?
Well, at the time in the 90s, the Twin Run was donated by the Thompsons' own Champion, which was a nice thing to donate to the city, but the two original houses that went with it were made into clubhouse and a little restaurant. Never sufficient to do the job. And I went to city council that we needed to demolish those two homes and build a decent clubhouse, and we can rent out rooms for parties and weddings, so on. And council agreed, and we did do that, and that was a nice improvement for Twin Run. And then we did a remodel in the inside of the Potter's golf course.
Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful clubhouse, beautiful, beautiful course. Your role in the fitness center?
Well, also part of the bicentennial was trying to come up with some type of arts place. And they hired a person from out of town that proposed different art facilities for different communities and really did a great job explaining the needs as well as what it benefits a community. And I bought into that. And at the time, the fitness center sits on a city parking lot and the city annex. We had a building there. It was a house. It was converted. And that was our income tax office at the time. We moved them over to the parking garage. So we donated the lot and the house we tore down so that they would have a place, and through the Bicentennial Commission and others donating money towards building the fitness center, my role was to acquire a site, and I think we got a good site for it.
All right. In our discussions previously, you got MLK Highway, Martin Luther King Highway.
Well, and one of the great things Jack Becker or Jack Kirsch worked on was the High Street Underpass, which is named for him.
Yes.
Along with Dick Fitton, were two people that were instrumental putting that project together, because they had to work with 3 railroads. Conrail was a part of it at the time, to get those relocated. And the railroads weren't really excited about it. People that lived back in those days would come to 4th Street, stop for a train, go to 5th Street and stop for a train, and then move to Erie Highway.
Kind of a nightmare for public safety.
It was very bad for public safety. So when we got the tracks off 4th Street, it opened up 4th Street. And we wanted to remove those tracks. Mike Samovisky was Public Works Director and worked with ODOT and removed the tracks. Only one thing happened in the meantime. German Village expanded beyond the 4th Street, which was one street, one width, and brought in some houses on the other side of Martin Luther King, which put a stop to the project for a while. And we worked with them to try and indicate this is a benefit to the community. It's also going to be a benefit to German Village, because it's going to get traffic off 2nd and 3rd Streets, which were major streets at those times. And we finally got through Federal Highways. It wasn't a problem, and they re-released the funding to build the highway, and that's how Martin Luther King was widened from 1 lane to almost 5 or 6 with turn lanes.
Now, okay. The streetscape along High Street, they were working on that when I was starting with the city.
That was one of my last projects, working with the Chamber of Commerce and getting commitments to do a streetscape project. We looked at a lot of other communities with different types of streetscape. Unfortunately, when Casualty moved, it caused a lot of other businesses to vacate downtown, and we're still suffering downtown from that. If you would ask me any question, what were you surprised about? I was most surprised, and it happened right after I left, that Casualty chose to buy a building in Fairfield and move. But that was probably the most unfortunate aspect of what happened downtown.
All right, the water plant expansion.
Another interesting deal we did with the county government. Ohio EPA told the county they could not build any more subdivisions in the county because they didn't have a decent water supply. Cincinnati wasn't available to them. They came to us and asked to expand the water plant so we could supply water.
Now we're talking about the plant on River Road for
Yes,
those
in
who
Fairfield.
may not know. Sure.
And we more than doubled that plant. We had a $59 million bond issue that we developed for that expansion, did the contract work. And then after I left, they didn't like that contract anymore and wanted to change the cost delivery to the county. But again, it goes back to my earlier comment on the Rentschler 1,000-acre annexation. We were building too many subdivisions. That's a personal opinion. That's only me. But I think you needed more variety in the county so we could create more job development. Even if it wasn't in Hamilton, more job development anywhere would have been helpful. Westchester got the majority. There's very little job development in Liberty. But that was a problem. Fairfield's been successful. They had open space, and the new highways that were put in and connected past Sims were great for Fairfield. I wish we had that opportunity.
All right. I've got here electric and gas financing. Now, the Greenup hydroelectric plant happened while you were with the city. So
I was the assistant, and I had no role really in Greenup.
Okay.
But I certainly supported it. I saw the need to go. when I was city manager, we had a lot of meetings with US EPA on stack emissions. We did some things at the plant to try and reduce when we were doing coal. And we could switch from coal to gas, but in those days, before there's this abundance of natural gas we have today, what's good about the power plant here in Hamilton is it can most of it run on gas.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could drive by, the big coal piles aren't there anymore, and they switched over to gas. I'm sure that they're using gas right now. So that was a benefit. But hydro is certainly, in the long run, short term, it's not economically feasible. You had to look at that in a 20, 30-year term. And some of the people didn't like the Green Up project, weren't looking in the long term. And Jack Kirsch and John Engel were involved with that. John Engel was the utility director. I had no role in that. But we were looking at a future, a lock and dam, which after I left was certainly done.
Mm-hmm.
But in the electric financing that was done, we did over $200 million in a bond issue in New York on that, $59 million in water and $30 million in gas. And Jack Becker started a gas replacement program. We replaced every gas line in this city and the old lines, and it was quite a project. And the streets were torn up for years.
Mm-hmm.
During his 4 years and my 10 years. I think we had 14 years of gas replacement.
I seem to remember Jay Liver talking about explosions.
We did.
gas
We had over
explosions.
that period probably 3 homes in the winter when the ground was frozen, gas leaks that escaped, traveled the pipelines into a home and would fill a home with gas, and then a pilot light would set it off.
Sure.
And we had one in Fairway Hills that did not have gas. It came in through the storm sewer.
So so the replacement was just huge.
It was a tremendous project, but a safety project. And also there was gas loss. We reduced the gas loss by doing that considerably. And you see every winter, there's some city, I saw a couple in Pennsylvania this year that had some massive gas explosion from a gas leak. So this is a very safe city today.
All right, let's talk about the High Street Bridge design.
Well, we had the old bridge, and certainly some people opposed doing anything to change it. I was in Columbus. ODOT wanted to give us a standard 6-lane bridge. And I was up there walking around, I saw a pretty nice bridge with these outcroppings and other things. Mike Samovisky, certainly, and probably even Jack worked on that project some. And I said, you know, we're as deserving as Columbus to have a decent looking bridge.
And why
I
not?
thought, let's at least keep that design idea alive. And Mike did, and others, Mark, I guess, after I left, because I wasn't here for the replacement of the bridge. And it's a great looking bridge.
It is. It really is. Anybody who walks it, I mean, just knows that. Now, last but nowhere near least, and I had to save this for last, Chemdyne. That was huge.
It was a very interesting and difficult 8 years that I worked on it, and unusual. A company comes in, takes over an industrial site, and you know, we inspect about every commercial and residential building that's built. But we weren't that close to the industrial side. So they had pretty much a free hand for a while, and then we heard about, gee, what is this stuff they're bringing in? Started doing checking.
Before you get too far into it, set this up, because we've got viewers who are going to be watching who don't have a clue of the time frame in where basically this operation was held.
It went through, Jack Kirsch was city manager, so sometime in the early 80s or late 70s, I don't remember the exact
All right,
dates.
just a basic time frame.
But it was an 8-year period, starting probably in the late 70s, going through the actual cleanup was finished about 85.
Okay.
And we did investigate it. Well, when it came to our attention really was Shell Chemical sent 3 or 4 tank cars with hazardous waste to the site. The company was actually engineers out of some large, well-known companies worked there, but it was a fast buck operation. What they were supposed to do is destroy these hazardous wastes through a thermal oxidizer, which was a fired way, lighting that stuff and burning it off.
Just incinerate it.
Incinerated.
Okay.
And they never built one. They did have a plan to build one, but they didn't. What they actually were doing, they had vats, and they'd pour these 55-gallon drums into a vat, mix it up, test the BTU value, and ship it off to cement kilns for fuel. They called it chem fuel. So the people that bought this had no idea they were burning hazardous waste. So that was a bad thing. And in Shell's case, they advertised they could handle anything, and they couldn't. They decided, or someone decided, why do we take all this out of the tank car and put it in a vat? We'll just mix it in the tank car. So they added chemicals to this tank car, and it started smoking and heated up. After a while, they called the fire department. That's when we got on the scene. So we were there for several days, hosing down these tank cars. We contacted Shell. They flew a private jet out here to see what was going on, immediately canceled their contract with Chemdyne. And as they stabilized that, it was removed. It got a lot of press, and other companies, legitimate companies, that they were picking up these 55-gallon drums, dropped their contracts with Chemdyne. Chemdyne sued me, city officials, and the city for $30 million for harassing their company. And we had a 3-day TRO, temporary restraining order, in courthouse over that, which should take about a half hour. And we asked that the company cease operations. Ohio didn't have a hazardous waste law. That was the benefit of Chemdyne. They did pass one, and I testified in Columbus why we need one after Chemdyne. For months and years, it went back and forth with Ohio EPA, and they studied the problem. But it wasn't until they were doing some mixing that they created a fire, a major fire. And in fact, the whole department had to respond, and some off-duty people.
So the operation's still continuing.
Still
Contracts
continued.
were canceled, but the operation was still continuing.
Still
so they were still taking it on chemicals.
Inventory and removing stuff. The fire brought it to the attention of U.S. EPA in Chicago. We had drums that went up like Roman candles.
Yeah, I heard the fire was legendary.
It was quite the fire. And fire department did a great job. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And but with the attention of U.S. EPA, there's a lot of parts to the stories. When the original tank car problem occurred, we had to get search warrants to go through their files to see what we wanted to identify what's in those tank cars. They wouldn't tell us. All their files had been emptied out. The tabs were there, but the content stuff, it's private. They didn't want us to know. Well, everything was suspicious. And then we got a tip from someone that they were going to do a pour, and that meant pour material in the storm sewers. This plant was the old Ford plant, or next door to the old Ford plant, and they actually took over the whole Ford plant lot.
And again, I'm just trying to
North
set this
end.
for the viewers. By the canal.
Next to the canal.
Okay.
I was on top of the electric power plant taking pictures of this almost a weekly basis of activities.
Wow.
And the odors were bad. We had complaints from Mercy Hospital on odors, and the North End residents complained on odors. We did everything we could, but we didn't have legal authority to deal with the problem. But US EPA could. I had OSHA come. Federal railroads came. We had every inspection team in the country there, and even OSHA didn't really do anything, which surprised me. I couldn't believe it. These employees were working without face masks or anything else. Didn't know what they were working with. So they did this pour. We had a 37-mile fish kill in the Great Miami River. The Ohio Division of Wildlife did something. They came and filed a lawsuit against them. And I remember Chemdyne paid the check, the damages, around $100,000 when the check bounced. So
Now this is damages on the fish kill?
fish kill.
Okay.
Fish kill damage. Anyway, that was another aspect of it. But we pursued it, and so did Ohio or U.S. EPA out of Chicago, Region 5. We finally got a hearing before the U.S. Attorney in Cincinnati to shut it down. And the federal judge at that time wanted an inventory of everything on site, and we spent, I don't know, a couple of weeks inventorying everything there, and the head of the chemistry department for the University of Cincinnati was leading our group. I was in the group. And then the state moved in and took the authority away from the owners and appointed an attorney, Jack Zettler, here in town. Jack Garrettson, I think, was also one of them, to manage the company and get rid of these chemicals, and we solved the problem. Mm-hmm. I was surprised we didn't get an indictment against the owners through the fish kill because we photographed them pouring it. We took samples as the pour went through to the canal and caused the fish kill in the Great Miami River. They walked away from it. And I said many times, well, the people that dealt with Chemdyne, the companies, they didn't want to make this a Superfund site. They upfronted $20 million to clean the site up, which it was extremely well done. The dirt was removed, the barrels removed, the contents were removed, the tanks were removed. They put a whole new rubber cover over the site, several acres, put dirt on it, grass, can never use it for anything. And then they put in a water plant to go down in the gravel and bring all these hydrocarbons back up. It's been running ever since that was built, about 1985. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to last 10 years. I did a check some months ago, and it's still operating.
Wow. So
the good news is it was cleaned up, and it was totally paid for by the chemical companies that did business with Chemdyne. Ohio got a hazardous waste law. It got a lot of press in the country, and I think other states followed suit. So there was a lot of good things came out of a bad thing.
And I think the groundwater consortium that we have now up and down the river is kind of a result
and that was
of that.
critical to us from the beginning, was protect the aquifer.
Absolutely.
And I think it made people more aware of how important the underground water system is in this region. It's one of the best in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and everybody talks now because we did, the water department did win those awards for through Berkeley Springs, best tasting municipal tap water, first in the USA and then the next year in the world.
And Miller Brewery.
So
chose
absolutely.
This area because of the aquifer. So there was a lot of good things that came out of it. It was unfortunate, but at the same time, I think a lot of valuable lessons, especially for Ohio EPA. They had to deal with it.
Sure.
Seymour, Indiana was another site Chemdyne had. I worked with the Indiana authorities to close that one up.
Wow.
So.
It's a fascinating story, it really is. But as I said, that'll be the last thing we cover. But you know, when you left Hamilton, you didn't retire. I mean, you left here as city manager, and then you went to.
I retired April 1st of '99, and actually was applying the year before. I thought I would like to spend a few years out west doing the same work, and gotten a little bit of friction with the city council because I had applied for a job at Greeley, Colorado, and the Greeley paper called the Hamilton Journal and did a story about my being a finalist at Greeley. And I did go out for an interview, but they hired their assistant, who was their former finance director, which all three of our finalists, besides the assistant, realized this was probably a nationwide search, but they already found the person they wanted. Mm-hmm. And I came back, city council wasn't too happy with that, which I understand. And so I told them that I would retire April 1st of '99, and they said, go ahead and apply if you want. So I did. And at the end, I was applying at Prescott, Arizona, and Cortez, Colorado. And Cortez called first and flew out some council members went through Hamilton, talked to a lot of people. It was pretty positive, and it was between me and another gentleman from Colorado, and they went to that city and interviewed their council and department heads and various community leaders, and it was negative, so they offered me the job, and I spent 8 years as city manager at Cortez, which is a small town, 8,500.
But I understand you vacationed out west a lot, so.
I did, but not, even though they accused me of job hunting on those vacations, I wasn't. I really enjoy Tetons, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, so I took my son on trips about every year out there.
All right. Well, I mean, you seem to have had a remarkable, fulfilling career. I mean, you talked earlier about the regret about the annexation, and is that it? Any other regrets?
No, not really. I just leave it with that was a very interesting time, the decade of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I was blessed with a lot of good employees that carried water for everybody, and it was interesting councils, and enjoyed some immensely, some were difficult, but that's the way this job is. You just, and then at that time, every 2 years we had an election, and it was for 2 years. So I went through a lot of people
Wow.
on council in that 27 years.
Well, what do you see as the significant accomplishments during your time as city manager here?
Well, I think my biggest accomplishment was paying off the general fund debt and saving money. And I left the general fund with much more money than I found it. And we paid off a lot of debt, and that was good. It's too easy to borrow money in this role. You can call Cincinnati and all of a sudden you got a check for whatever you need because we're good for it. So the financing is always an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Hamilton today, the utilities are a great asset to the community, though you can't use utility funds in the general fund. So I was monitoring the general fund much more than the utility funds. I think that was the legacy I left, was money. I think I appreciated City Council honoring me with the fire headquarters, but I think that was a facility that really helped the fire department to perform their functions. But I think there were so many little things, little projects we did during that 10 years that they all helped each other.
Sure. Well, before we close the show, I was just wanting to give you the opportunity. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I think Hamilton has a great history, and I think it has some challenges. And as I see it today, coming back 13 years later, I didn't mention I retired from my job in Cortez at the end of 2007. So I've actually been really retired 4 years now. There are some tremendous challenges here, both for the employees, the public, and the administration. And that's that job loss thing that I tried to correct in the 90s that didn't happen. So now we don't have Champion, don't have Beckett's or Smart Papers. And there's other businesses I brought here, Hamilton Fixture, that just announced they're closing down. So that's a continuing issue, and it's going to be difficult to deal with, to provide the level of services people are accustomed to with less resources. And that's going to be tough. And I wish them all the luck in the world to work together, that they can solve these problems, but they're going to have an open mind, both management and labor. The other thing I developed when I was here was Team Hamilton. And Team Hamilton, our labor relations weren't good in '89, and they were excellent by the time I left, but it was participation from everybody in the union side, management side, working together for the common good, which was my philosophy. I mean, I went to work, I was going to make decisions what's best for this community. Not for me, not for a union, not for a department. What's best for this community? And as long as you have that philosophy, and today's employment group need to think about that long and hard, because that's the most important question they have to deal with.
Well, Hal, it's been fascinating. I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen.
Well, enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And that'll do it for this edition of City Vision. We'd like to thank you at home for watching TV Hamilton, hometown television with a personal touch. And from all of us here at CityVision, I'm Mark Murray. Thanks for watching.